Welcome to today's episode of The Men's Mysteries. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the connection between male shaming and male anxiety and what that means. So first, let's take a moment and define our terms. What is it I mean by male shaming and male anxiety? Male shaming is the experience that a man faces when he is shamed for being a man, or when he has behaviors called out, and they are called out in such a way that they are used to shame him to behave a certain way. Male anxiety is the anxiety that a man feels around being male, and really the anxiety around feeling able to express himself and be himself as a man and a person. And the two are linked, because the anxiety often is coming up in relationship to the man going about his everyday life and essentially being called out for being a man and for behaving in certain ways. So let's look at some of the behavior that is typically where we see male shame come up. In modern masculinity, we have a couple different narratives that show up. One of the narratives, for example, that a lot of men have grown up with is, and that you may very well be familiar with, is the experience of being told, don't cry, don't show emotion, don't express what's going on with you internally, don't do anything that actually shows people that you're a human being. Instead, you should be showing up as a stoic, put together man who's got everything figured out. You should show up in the world acting like no matter what's going on internally, like you have your act all together and that you know what you're doing at all times. That's one narrative. The other narrative that I see that gets put out there is found in terminology such as manspreading, mansplaining, and the latest one, which I saw recently, which is man-keeping. And these are terms that are essentially used to describe deficits in masculine behavior, or more specifically, deficits in men. And it's again used as a shaming tactic. It's basically being used as a way to say, this is how you ought to behave, or this is the way you should show up. And if you show up in this other way, I'm going to shame you for it. And you may have encountered this as well. If you've heard the term mansplaining before, you may have heard of it both in, if you're a man, you may have heard of it in reference to yourself, or you may have heard of it in reference to another man where, that man or you may have offered an opinion or a perspective on a subject and been told that you're mansplaining somebody else. Man-keeping, the term that I found most recently, was a term I read in an article, and it's essentially a term that describes women being in relationship to men and women having to do the emotional labor and having to emotionally take care of men. So essentially keeping men. And the argument is that that women doing this, that they don't want to be in relationship with men when they have to do that. So these are examples of shaming behavior that essentially are calling men out in certain ways. Now, here's the problem with shaming behavior or with shaming tactics. Shame does not induce or create the change in men, or really just people in general, when it's used. And chances are, anyone watching this video, whether you're a woman or a man, has experienced shame at one time or another. Let's take a moment and define what shame is. Shame is essentially saying you are bad for being who and what you are. So when you experience that idea of shame, you're essentially being told, I'm bad for who and what I am. And this creates a real problem in terms of being able to make change. Because if I am already identifying that I am bad for being who and what I am, or if you identify as being bad for who and what you are, the impetus to make actual changes is not going to really work. If anything, what it's going to do is it's going to cause people to withdraw. And this is one of the things that I see happen a lot with men in society, is that when a man is shamed for being a man, he's going to withdraw. even more than he already is. And a lot of men are already feeling isolated and withdrawn in the world, or they're engaged in nice guy behaviors. And one of the reasons why we have a nice guy epidemic is because a lot of men feel like they have to keep themselves small. If I show up a certain way, I'm going to be punished for it, is basically what ends up playing at the root of being a nice guy. So if you find yourself identifying with nice guy behaviors where you're not voicing what you want and need, where you're not sharing what's going on within you, where you're trying to people please and get approval from other people and trying to go with the flow, a lot of the times what ends up happening is that you are essentially getting punished for being a man. And that's one of those things to watch out for. So when we look at what's happening is that men feel anxious in regards to this because they're being measured against artificial standards of what it means to be a man. And also the challenge is at the same time, men are also told, like, you need to do the emotional labor. You need to do the inner work. I'm not going to argue that because I think it is really important. Men definitely need to step up and do their inner work. They need to be willing to do the work on themselves. And I agree that men shouldn't be putting that kind of work on the romantic relationship. In fact, here's the simple truth. If you're in a romantic relationship and either one or both people are doing a lot of work around healing themselves, using that relationship as the vehicle, you are essentially killing that relationship. Because at that point, the relationship has become therapy. So whether you're a man or a woman, neither one of you wants to be the therapist for your romantic partner. It doesn't feel attractive. It doesn't feel powerful. It essentially takes the energy out of the relationship. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize. One of the important things to also acknowledge is that men can't get support in romantic relationships if they are being shamed for being men, and shame is being held over them as a way of controlling them. When a man is being shamed, what is really happening is he's being told that he's bad. This is not going to create the type of change that you want to see in that man. Because that man's not going to trust that he's going to be supported or held or honored or witnessed in a way that's going to allow him to follow through on that change. If anything, this is just going to encourage him to withdraw even further, keep more things to himself, and at some point, this is going to come out in the relationship sideways. And it'll come out sideways because of the anxiety that the man feels around being a man. Because if he knows that he's going to be shamed for being a man, he's not going to trust that he can be safe in that relationship. And so that anxiety will take many different forms. It could be him being a workaholic. It could be him getting into porn addiction. Or it could be him going and having an affair. It could be any number of different things. And a lot of times what's really happening is the man is trying to soothe his anxiety around being a man because he's been shamed for being a man. So he already feels bad about being a man. So then he goes and does behaviors that temporarily numb that experience, and address the anxiety that he's feeling, but then reinforce that experience of shame. This doesn't create the kind of change that men need in today's world. What men need is support. Now, that support shouldn't just come from their romantic partners, and I'm not arguing that it should. I want to be very clear about that. The fact of the matter is that when a man puts all of his emotional eggs into one basket, it is going to break that basket. It's going to break that relationship. I've seen that time and again. And when I work with men who are not comfortable with expressing their emotions in general, one of the things that I find is that they do end up putting a lot of pressure on the relationship because they're trying to deal with the emotions the best they can, and they're hoping that their partner will pick up the slack. And that's doing a disservice to them, and it's doing a disservice to their romantic partner. So if you're a man and you're hearing this, I mean, that's one thing to really keep in mind. And so you might be wondering then, well, what do I do about this? First of all, men need to know that they aren't alone. That's the most important thing. Men, you're not alone. There are other men out there going through what you're experiencing. But what I notice a lot of times is that men don't always talk with other men. And part of that is because men don't feel safe about opening up. They're worried about getting it right in their romantic relationship. You're worried about getting it right at your job. You're worried about getting it right at different social venues. And that's the pressure that a lot of men put on themselves. It's like, I've got to get this right. I've got to show up a certain way. I've got to behave a certain way. I've got to have my act together. Well, when men put that kind of pressure on themselves all the time, it essentially keeps them from fully expressing themselves. But here's the other thing. Men learn that when they share something, it can be weaponized against them. If a man is told that he has just mansplained somebody else, and this is done as a form of shaming him, or he's told that he shouldn't cry or express himself emotionally, what ends up happening is he's not going to trust that he can share anything. He's not going to trust that he can share what his thoughts or feelings are about a given topic, because he knows he's quote unquote going to get it wrong. He's quote unquote the problem. And when men feel like they're the problem, they are going to withdraw and isolate. That doesn't help. That just makes them feel more lonely. This is part of what causes the male loneliness epidemic. I can't get it right no matter what I do. I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm going to be shamed for being a man. That's at the root of what's going on with this kind of narrative. So it's really important to recognize and understand that, because I think that plays a very important role in what's getting in the way of men being able to fully express themselves. Now, part of the solution is that men ultimately need more than what they're going to find like in a romantic relationship. Romantic relationships are not where men should be doing their deep inner work. Romantic relationships are meant to be enjoyed, where there's connection and there's intimacy. And yes, sometimes that means that you're going to share some wounds from the past. You're going to share some experiences that occurred. But if that's primarily what's happening, then basically what you're doing is trauma bonding. And that's not going to help either partner. That's just going to cause both of you to wallow in the suffering that you're experiencing. So what should a man do then, you may wonder? Well, the recommendation that I'm going to share is that men need to connect with other men in a container, in a space where they are supporting each other. What does that look like? Well, that can look like, doing an in-person or online meeting where it is a male-only space where men are able to share and talk about what's going on. And let me be clear, this isn't about men complaining and griping and everything else. So it's not like it's like a man's getting onto a session and then griping about his wife or girlfriend and saying like, here's all the things that are wrong. No, that's not helpful either, because griping and complaining is just going to reinforce the resentments that are occurring. Instead, what needs to occur is that men are given a space where they can share what the challenges are that they're having in their lives, and where they can be honest about maybe where some of their shortcomings are occurring, or they can be honest about the fact that they feel shame or whatever else, and not have it weaponized against them, not have it held over their heads. Because when shame is held over the head of a man and used as a way to punish him, it is going to hold him back from the fullest expression of himself and from doing the deep inner work he needs to do. But when a man has a circle where he can share what's going on and where his brothers are going to hold him in loving accountability, that creates the transformation that the man needs. So if you're a man who's listening or watching this video right now, one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is to reach out to another man in your life. Reach out to somebody that you know and share something that's going on in your life, a challenge that you're having. And I also have a resource for you below, which is a free guide called From Chaos to Clarity, which walks you through some techniques and processes that you can apply to handling your anxiety and shame when they rear up. If you're feeling shame or anxiety around being a man, what I want to do is teach you some practical techniques to address these expressions of anxiety and shame. And remember that you don't have to go through this alone. You don't have to be alone in the world. There are resources out there available for you. And one of the most important things that you can do is connect with someone else who's going to hold you and support you and believe in you, and at the same time challenge you, because men need to be challenged as well. And here's the truth. Life is going to be challenging at times. When you're a man, you're going to go through some hard times. In fact, that's true of just people in general, whether you're a man or a woman. But I'm speaking specifically to the men here. You're going to go through some challenging times. And the key to going through those challenging times, it isn't to show up as a stoic man who never shows his emotions and keeps everything to himself. It's to show up with the right people who are going to support you and be there with you as you're going through the changes and transformations in your life that you're going through. That's one of the most important things that you can do, is to surround yourself with people who are going to have your back. And yes, that may mean sometimes that they're going to share some observations that are challenging to hear. That's part of the game. But they're going to share it from a place of love instead of shame. It's not going to be saying like, you're not good enough, or you're mansplaining, or I'm having to man keep you, or any of the other things that are being said out there to men which serve to shame them. Instead, what's going to be said is, look, I see that you're struggling right now. I want you to connect with another man and share what's going on. I think that that's going to help you show up more presently in the relationship, and it's going to help me to support you, knowing that you've got somebody else there to connect with. Or it could be, hey, like, look, I'm feeling some real challenges in my work right now. Here's what I'm doing. And then having some other men share, hey, I've been there, done that. I know what that's like, and here's some things that we're observing or hearing. It can be any of those different things, but what it really needs to happen is men need to have supportive networks, and that supportive network can't just be, your mom or your wife or your dad, for that matter. It needs to be more than just that. It needs to be other men. And part of that is also learning some practical techniques and skills for managing and expressing and dealing with what you're going through, knowing that those skills can help you. And that's one of the reasons why I have the free book that I have below, which is called From Chaos to Clarity, which you can get. And that can help you to figure out like what you want to do and how you want to move forward in dealing with this feeling of anxiety and shame. Man shaming doesn't work. All it's doing is creating a deeper division in our societies. All it's doing is shaming men for being men and hurting those men and holding them back. If we want men to change, well, that has to occur with some support. I'm Taylor Elwood, and I coach men with anxiety that are experiencing male anxiety in their life, or masculine anxiety in their lives. I coach men who are feeling shame in their lives, and what I do is I help them turn their anxiety and their shame into action. So if you're a man who's watching this, you need some support, feel free to drop a comment. And also, if there's anything you feel like I missed, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, love to hear what your thoughts are, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Thanks.